The crisis around Ukraine has been extremely confusing, and generally I've not been impressed by the ability of Western analysts to interpret the situation. There have been so many wrong takes and just too simple interpretations, and also by otherwise good and capable analysts. And in this video, I want to look at why that is the case. And I think the most important reason is that we actually have two crises on top of each other. On the one hand, Russia is redefining the rules of the European security order. And on the other hand, there's also a specific crisis around Ukraine that they want to be solved within this new security order that the West has never heard of before. Let's be honest, the crisis around Ukraine has been difficult to understand. And I think if we go back in time, say 6 months, then nobody had predicted the situation that we're in now. But as we recognize the scale of Russia's military buildup on the borders of Ukraine in the late fall of 2021, it became more clear that this was different. And for me personally, in the beginning, I thought it had to do with Ukraine, that Putin was unsatisfied with the situation in eastern Ukraine and wanted to push through a resolution. But then when Russia published their demands for security guarantees from the West just before Christmas, that didn't fit the picture. So I had to revise my analysis and understand how these things are connected. And the result of that analysis is what I presented in my video, where I argued that the most logical course of action for Russia would be a large war in Ukraine and not a diplomatic solution or a small war. And I believe that analysts should make predictions like that when there is a crisis, because ultimately that's why we have analysts, to tell us what's going on when things are hard to understand. And then, of course, it's also okay that analysts are sometimes wrong or change their mind when they see how things play out. So if I'm wrong about my prediction, then I'll make a new video where I look at why I got it wrong. But that's just the risk you have to take if you want to be valuable as an analyst. But when I look at the Western discourse about the crisis, I think that many people have overlooked the consequences of Russia's demands for security guarantees. And this means that the debate is still very much focused on Ukraine. And I'm recording this on the 18th of February of 2022, and we still don't know whether there will be a war or a diplomatic solution. But quite frankly, it's astonishing how many people believe that the whole crisis will be over if we just promise that Ukraine won't be a member of NATO, or who believe that Russia actually already won because they got a bunch of media attention. And that reasoning just doesn't add up for me. And here's where I think these people get it wrong. What Russia is trying to do is actually two things at the same time. On the one hand, they are redefining the rules of the international system. They are creating a new European security order that very much looks like a return to the Cold War. And from a Western point of view, this sounds extremely stupid because we think the Cold War was a terrible time. But the Russians are essentially signaling to us that they don't think the current security order is working for them, and that they like the Cold War better. So that's what NATO's Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg talked about when he said that we now have a new normal with Russia. And we have to understand that in many ways, we're back to the Cold War, and this will change many things about how things work in the coming decades. And it's not up to us in the West whether we like it or not, because this is something that Russia can change unilaterally. And then on the other hand, we also have a crisis around Ukraine. And Russia wants this crisis to be solved within the framework of the new European security order that the West doesn't quite know yet. And I think that what many people in the West get wrong about it is that they try to understand the questions about Ukraine within the logic of the old security order. So they imagine that on the other side of this crisis, we will return to where we were last year. So this is a world where There are some sanctions against Russia, but we have otherwise relatively peaceful daily interactions, and we can have close relations with Ukraine on a wide range of topics like trade and other things. And if this is what you imagine the end result of the Ukraine crisis will be, then it would make no sense for Russia to attack. Instead, you'd assume that Russia would want to seek a diplomatic solution. But the thing is, this would pretty much just bring us back to the status quo from before Russia started the crisis in the first place. And obviously, they didn't create all this just to achieve nothing, right? Even the question of NATO membership for Ukraine was actually pretty much a resolved question before this escalation. Like for years, we have pointed to the frozen conflicts in Georgia and Ukraine as a proof of like Putin's abilities as a chess player. Because these frozen conflicts ensured that Georgia and Ukraine didn't live up to the membership criteria of NATO. So that is how so many pundits arrive at the conclusion that we can offer Russia what is basically just a formalization of the status quo, and then Russia will de-escalate and we can return to business as usual. So we need to understand that there is a new order. There is a new normal where business as usual doesn't work anymore. Regardless of how the crisis around Ukraine ends, whether there will be a diplomatic solution or a war, on the other side of this, there will be a new baseline. And there will be more crises like this in the future. Like right now, there is a Ukraine crisis, but the next one could be a Finland crisis or a Lithuania crisis or a Black Sea crisis or what have you. So I think we should focus on understanding these two things independently of one another. And if we do that, we can get an idea about how this new normal looks and what we will have to deal with when the current crisis is over. And that would be a situation that looks a lot more like the Cold War than we've been used to. So we probably need to think more in terms of a stronger military presence in Eastern Europe and a constant awareness that war is a real possibility. And that also includes a much more pronounced division of Europe between Russia and the West. And that would be along something that resembles an Iron Curtain. And if we apply this image of what the normal situation is, then it becomes clear that the crisis in Ukraine is much more complicated, because what's happening right now is in fact that we are seeing a fight about where that Iron Curtain shall be and whether Ukraine is on one side or the other side. At least that's Russia's vision about what we're doing. So that was my explanation of why I think so many analysts have struggled to make sense of what we're seeing between Russia and Ukraine. They interpret the crisis within the framework of the old normal, the post-Cold War security order. So they end up coming with predictions that will bring us back to the old baseline. But we're beyond that now. Russia is using this crisis to shape the post-crisis security order for Europe, so we need to look beyond the crisis to understand where it's going. All right, I'll end it here. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you again next time.